Now, back to Access Tech Live, the latest in tech and accessibility with Stephen Scott and Mark Aflalo.
And we're back on Access Tech Live. Rachele Manett is with us this week as we break down some of the stigma around sex and disability. Now, Rachele is the host of That Sex Show. Let's watch a clip.
My name is Andrew Jansen. I use they and he pronouns. And I am a person with a disability. I have a condition called Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, and it affects me in a number of different ways, but I use a power wheelchair, and I have support workers that help me with things.
So let's start with talking a little bit about Tetra Society. What do they do, and how did they get involved with sex toys?
Yeah, the Tetra Society is a national organization that builds custom assistive devices for people with disabilities. So if you can't find it commercially, that's where we come into play. So we got into the area of sex toys because the same reason we get into any other area of devices is that people requested it. We said, why not? And so let's try this and make it happen for people. You don't need to have a disability per se or identify as having one to have difficulty using a lot of the toys that are out there. It's amazing when you think about them, and they're just really hard to hold. A lot of them.
Yeah, totally.
It's just like, how am I supposed to grasp this thing to use it in the first place for most people? And then imagine having any kind of additional barrier, whether that's dealing with pain or function in your hands or being able to see and interact with something in the same way. Thinking about how do we build adaptive handles for things, or how do we change the shape or the material of something so that you get a different sensation out of it, and it's not so like the vibration isn't so intense and rough. Like, sometimes those things are just too much.
Yeah.
That's Andrew Jansen there on That Sex Show with Rachele Manett, who's with us this week on Access Tech Live. You can watch episodes of that show on AMI+. Now, Rachele is with us here, and we're going to get into this conversation around the tech itself. But you said something before the break that I thought was really interesting. You said it was another form of assistive technology. And I guess that comes with all the same accessibility challenges that we face with our apps and our websites and like we were just hearing from Andrew there, the physical nature of products.
Absolutely. Yeah, I find that we've come pretty far in the sex toy industry of making products that meet more needs and fit more bodies. But I find that the idea that someone might have a hard time gripping an object is always sort of lost in the fray of things, or how that something might be too heavy for most people to hold, let alone someone who has decreased mobility in their hands or shoulders or arms. I still think that because of all the stigma that exists around sex and disability, there's still not a ton of mainstream sex toy companies that are creating really thoughtful toys from that lens, at least, of how do we make this more accessible for lots of different people and not just sort of who we think our market is going to be.
Rachele, I know you're going to show us some stuff that you have there, but before you do that, I wanted to ask about, in that clip that we played from That Sex Show, Andrew talks about the fact that, people ask, so they deliver. That's something that they do at Tetra Society. Do you think it's a case of people not reaching out to some of these manufacturers and saying, hey, by the way, we're here. Can you make this work a little bit different for us?
I think, yeah, a little bit. I sometimes wonder how, if you're not already sort of in the sex toy industry, how involved are you in the sex toy industry? It's but I do find that there is a little bit more conversation happening. When I was doing some prep for this and talking to one of my friends who is in sex research, we were talking about what are the big names in the sex toy industry even saying when it comes to accessibility? And so we went on to this specific website that has all the news that you could possibly find when it comes to, kind of what's going on in the sex toy industry and in the sex industry in general. And there was one article from 2023. And then before that, there was an article from maybe 10 years ago. And the 10 years ago one wasn't like when they talk about accessibility, it's very basic. It's very like, well, we're talking physical accessibility most of the time. We're not thinking about how someone will afford that physically accessible thing in theory, or what goes into setting it up to make it accessible for someone. But really, like a lot of people who don't experience disability themselves, I think are very stuck on like the physical piece of like, how do I carry this? How do I hold this? What do I do if I don't walk, or if I need someone to set something up physically for me? And there's a lot missed in terms of like sensory stuff. Often is a big one that I find is getting missed a lot. And yeah, same with like vision loss or really anything beyond like, oh, this person uses a wheelchair, so we have to make sure that like this works for that. There's just, without consulting with disabled people, they're going to miss stuff.
Yeah.
So let's do some show and tell. What do you got there? What do you want to talk about?
Yeah, so I love show and tell. This is my favorite bit. So I'm like, got to start with this big thing that I've got here first, of course, because it is pretty honkin'. It's heavy. This is called the Kion, is what the toy is called, by the brand Kiro. And Kiro makes some pretty like high-tech type devices, and mostly stroker sleeves. And stroker sleeves are essentially made for someone who has a penis, or something that sort of like is external from the body. And really what they normally are is some kind of squishy sleeve with an opening at the front that you put some lube in, and it feels good when you move it around. Usually there's a lot of, things you have to do with your hands. You either have to move it up and down that way, or you need to move your hips. And so in this case, Kiro has made a device that kind of does all the work for you. And I'm not, I had to change out what was on the front because it was like maybe not super PG. So this is just on the front
Appreciate
here.
That.
Yeah, right. It's like
I thought that honestly, I thought there was a microphone on your table before.
Yeah.
I didn't. Can you describe it to the audience who can't see it, obviously?
Yeah, totally. So what I have attached to my table, and it sort of has one of those like, can't remember what they're called, but like a clasp that makes it stay on a surface. Clamp. That's the word I'm looking for. Yeah. And attached to it is this big honking machine that is black. It's kind of got some fancy buttons on it. It looks very sleek. And there's kind of like a hole protruding out of it. And in that hole is the squishy stroker sleeve. And this one is clear and doesn't have any specific kind of defining features on it. I would say it's just kind of got some texture to it. But you can also get them that have like a body part where the opening is, so that you can do a little imagination, I suppose, for if you like a visual of that. I took that off for this because when I showed my partner, they were like, "Are you going to put that on TV?" I was like, "Oh, right. I have to think about where I'm going." And I often forget because I'm just kind of in this world and forget what.
I just want to ask you, Rachele, on the point about what you were talking about there, with the fact that this can almost assist you itself, because I imagine a lot of these devices have buttons on them, which again can create problems, or apps that are connected to them, or whatever it might be. So how does this one differ to that?
Yeah, well, that's the thing. Like, it is really useful for the physical pieces, but I would say is missing a lot when it comes to the accessibility of like the buttons. I had to play around for like 10 minutes to figure out what buttons to even press to make it work. And they're all in like kind of hidden places. And so what is cool about this is it does the work for you, but someone has to press those buttons and someone has to find those buttons. And so, even what I would consider like kind of up there in accessible technology is still pretty inaccessible. And it's so heavy. It's a really heavy toy. I was like kind of trying to play around with it before, and it was hard to carry. I was like, I don't know if this is going to work. It's also gigantic, and so going to be more difficult to store. And yeah, it just, we've only really gone so far in something that we're considering accessible technology in this case.
So this is considered accessible because it's clamped and it doesn't move, I guess. So you don't have to physically, manhandle it,
Exactly. And it kind of does the work for you. Like, I'll turn it on if I can, again, also figure out where the button is.
Find the buttons, yeah.
let's see. Yeah. So it's, you can sort of, it's like going in and out. That part that you would like put a body part in is moving on its own. And I don't know how obvious that is on the camera.
You say it's big, but I'm kind of thinking to myself, you know, there's a privacy aspect to this, because a lot of people may have someone, like, for example, okay, if it's a carer, maybe someone who they know, then that's okay. They'll probably understand, and that's fine. But, you know, if you have friends around, you don't want someone finding it and sort of bringing it out saying, what on earth is this, right? There's a privacy aspect to this, I guess, as well.
Yeah, for sure. And a conversation I have with a lot of folks is they're not necessarily comfortable having their carers like come and like set up their masturbation time, or like come and help them set up for like sex with another person. It's yeah, there is a lot of like vulnerability that we sort of have to be okay with when we're setting up to use something like this, or really just
this is the thing, isn't it? We have to we always have to give so much of ourselves to other people, don't we, as when we're disabled? We have to open ourselves up to other people in ways that a lot of people who are not disabled don't even think about. You know, they drive to work on their own, singing along in the car. You know, for me, that's sitting in a taxi or a bus. You know, I'm always having to sit with someone. You know, you're never really alone, and that can, with this particular topic, that can be really difficult, I imagine.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is a conversation that I have with a lot of people. And even like when they're dating, when they're trying to find like new sexual partners, there's a lot of, you know, you have to tell them a lot more than someone who's able-bodied might share with someone their first time having sex.
Yeah.
And, you know, sometimes you can frame it as like, this is my access need, but sometimes it's like, okay, you're going to learn my whole life story, because if I don't share it with you, you might ask the questions anyways. And like, then what do I do? It's kind of like, I might as well get that out right off the bat to try to stave off uncomfortable conversations in a sense.
So that's one example of accessible product. What else do you got?
Yeah, so this is the toy that, you know, says it's accessible, and we want it to be accessible, and it's okay. My favorite kinds of accessible toys are ones that I have kind of, I don't know, MacGyvered or like hacked on my own to make them more accessible. So here I've got a pillow. Pillows for me are kind of one of my favorite accessible devices in a sense. Like, they're very low tech. I think a lot of us probably have a pillow somewhere. But here I've attached a thigh harness to it. And so a thigh harness, it kind of looks like a knee brace from, you know, if you're used to using a knee brace. But what it is essentially like a stretchy band. And it has Velcro on one end, so you can attach it to things. And then in sort of the middle of that band, there's a little hole, and it's got some like what would be an address like boning essentially to try to give it some structure. And it's a great accessibility tool anyways, because if you're someone who is seated most of the time, or, you know, there's just a lot of reasons that like your pelvis can't be involved in some kind of sexual experience, you can just attach it to your thigh, or in this case, a pillow. And I love playing around with this because just attaching a harness to a pillow, like I can do so much with this. And this is one of my favorite things. So for one, like, of course, you can sort of put a dildo in it into the way that it's meant to be used. Here I have what is actually a thrusting vibrator. Also had to think about which one to bring so that it wouldn't be too, you know, freaky, I guess. And it kind of like, it's doing the job for you. It's thrusting, it's going up and down. It just looks like any standard sort of dildo or vibrator, or however you want to call it. And it's got a base that you can fit into that harness here. And so you can hold the pillow to you, or someone else can hold the pillow to you. And it means you don't have to use your hands and all that dexterity. I also find that the buttons here have a little bit more texture where you can kind of tell what they are. And there's only 3 buttons, so not a ton of work to memorize kind of where they are and feel it out and see what you can do with that.
I love the MacGyvering aspect of it, because you're just making something that wasn't accessible in the first place. Can I ask you a question about some of the app-controlled devices that some are even internet connected? We had a conversation with a company at CES that was talking about some of those devices, and they didn't really know what I was talking about when it came to the accessibility of the control mechanism itself, being the app itself. Are we finding more and more of these type of devices show up in mainstream?
Yeah, so like right now I can think of several different brands that are doing like app controlled technology. But when I've like written to them to be like, how accessible is your technology? Like, can someone who uses a screen reader use it? Or like, can someone who uses like voice to text use it? Like, is there some kind of voice control mechanism to it? And usually, if there is a voice control mechanism, it still has to be accessed somehow, like by our fingers and by the way that we would use, and like by our eyes ultimately. And I don't think that that's being thought of so much when it comes to disability. Like they're definitely thinking about access to pleasure from like I guess an able-bodied perspective, from like a, well, we want people to be able to access this when they're far away from each other, or like kind of secretly, like you just look like you're on your phone, but actually you're controlling someone's toy from wherever while you're like at the grocery store or something. I don't know what people are doing. You know, we're all a little weird when we want to be. But yeah, like I do find that even in these like pieces of tech that are supposed to be really high tech and like kind of the first of their kind, they're still missing the ball when it comes to making more accessible technology, or making technology more accessible.
Rachele, I just want to take a moment just to say thank you so much for coming on, because this is a really interesting topic, but it's, I imagine for so many people, including me, although I have to say I'm kind of coming around to the idea of talking about it. I think it's fascinating. I'm really glad we did. I want to recognize you, but I also want to recognize here at AMI, people actually willing to have this conversation, because this is real world, right? This is the world we live in. And, you know, we're disabled people, but that doesn't mean sex is off limits, and it shouldn't be. So I'm really grateful to you for coming on and sharing your insights and just in the way you've done it so respectfully as well. Thank you for that, Rachele.
Yeah, thank you for having me. This is my favorite thing to talk about. I love talking about sex, but I really love talking about accessibility in sex. It's just, you know, my two favorite things wrapped into one.
Rachele, if people want to get a hold of you or track you down, where can they find you?
Yeah, so best way to get a hold of me is through Venus Envy. So venusenvy.ca is our website. And if you're an Instagram person, it's at Venus Envy HFX for the Halifax location, and at Venus Envy Ottawa for the Ottawa location. And I'm in Halifax, so that's the best way to get a hold of me. But either is fine. I work for both, so anyone can find me in those ways.
Rachele Manett, thank you so much for taking the time to join us again. If people want to find that sex show, you can check out AMI Plus right now. When we come back, answers to our question of the day. What was your favorite halftime show? It's coming up in just a couple of days. This is Access Tech Live. We'll be back in just a moment.
There's more Access Tech Live to come. Get involved and have your say at Access Tech Live on social media. We'll be right back.